For millions of Australians, everyday life before the 1970s followed a rhythms that now feel impossible. Milk bottles clinking at dawn, children vanishing outdoors for hours, houses filled with smells as distinct as their families' stories. None of it was treated as precious, yet the way it disappeared changed the shape of trust, freedom, and childhood itself. What happened to that world, and why do these old habits still echo in memory, even when they are gone? You didn't need to check the time in the morning. Certain sounds told you exactly where the day was. The hollow clink of milk bottles against a wire crate, the soft thud of fresh bread landing on a veranda. A distant whistle might drift in from a factory or railway yard, a signal in the air that breakfast was nearly over. Doors opened and closed, sometimes a screen door, its spring creaking and slamming, sometimes the heavy front gate with its own familiar squeak. Footsteps on the path, quick and light, meant someone was already off to fetch something or meet a mate. Somewhere, a voice called out a name, half inside, half outside, floating through the open air. Life had a rhythm. Everyone followed it, even if nobody talked about it. The morning moved on its own, without clocks or reminders. Children didn't announce where they were going. They just left. Sometimes in a loose pack, sometimes alone, sometimes trailing a billy cart cobbled together from pram wheels and scrap timber found at the tip. Bikes coasted down quiet streets, bare feet on pedals, no one worrying about the time. A creek at the edge of the suburb or a patch of bush behind the last house was always waiting. There was an unspoken understanding. Someone would know where to find you if it mattered. The world outside the front gate belonged to everyone, and the day stretched out, wide and unhurried, ready to be filled with whatever turned up. Every home had its own atmosphere, even before you stepped inside. Some kitchens carried the thick, familiar smell of roast lamb or sausages, mingled with the tang of boiled vegetables and gravy. Floor polish left a shine that caught the morning sun, and the scent of sunlight soap or eucalyptus drifted from laundry baskets and back verandas. In other houses, the air was heavy with garlic and simmering tomato sauce, olive oil warming on the stove, coffee bubbling in a battered espresso pot. You could tell, just by breathing in, whose mother was making what and which part of the world their family had come from. Furniture wore the marks of years, patched armrests, chairs with new covers stretched tight over old springs, jars that once held jam or pickles now lined shelves, filled with buttons, nails, or leftover dripping from Sunday's roast. Nothing was wasted. Socks were darned, knees patched, and when a radio crackled or a toaster stopped working, it went down the street to the repairman, not out with the rubbish. The local cobbler's shop always smelled of leather and glue, with shoes lined up on the counter waiting for new soles. Even the smallest corner store had a spot for mending. Someone behind the counter who could fix a kettle or sharpen a knife. Things lasted because people made them last. A table with a wobbly leg or a lamp with a frayed cord might be fixed and used for years, handed from one room to another. This was not something anyone talked about. It was just what you did. The house felt lived in, shaped by the hands that looked after it. And every time you walked through the door, you knew exactly where you were. Adults rarely explained the rules. In most homes, children learned to keep quiet when grown-ups were talking. There was an understanding, sometimes signalled by a glance, sometimes by the hush that fell as a parent entered the room. Voices dropped, chairs straightened, and eyes flicked to the floor. That old saying, "Children should be seen and not heard," wasn't just a phrase. It was the air you breathed. At school, the lesson was even clearer. A cane or a heavy leather strap might rest on the teacher's desk. Not always used, but always there. A silent warning. The teacher's footsteps echoed between rows of desks. You watched how other kids sat, how they held their pencils, when they spoke and when they stayed silent. If someone stepped out of line, the punishment was swift. Nobody needed to spell it out. You learned what was expected by watching, by listening for the shift in a teacher's tone or the tightening of a parent's jaw. There were no long talks about right and wrong. Rules lived in the space between actions and consequences. Even at home, the boundaries were clear without words. You waited for your turn, you watched for a nod or a frown, and you learned quickly that some questions were better left unasked. In that world, respect was something you picked up by paying attention, not by being told. Evenings settled over the neighbourhood with a kind of hush that did not feel empty. The air outside was thick with the sound of insects, a steady hum rising from the grass and gardens as the sun fell behind the houses. Sometimes you heard a dog bark or the faint clatter of a gate as someone came home late, but mostly it was quiet. Not the kind of silence that pressed in, but the sort that let you breathe. On front verandas, people sat with their feet up watching the last light fade, not needing to say much. A neighbour might wander over, lean on the fence, and talk about nothing in particular, or just stand there listening to the cicadas. It was normal for the pause to stretch out. Nobody hurried to fill the gaps. If someone needed a cup of sugar or a lawnmower, they would call over the fence or walk straight through the side gate without knocking. Doors were left unlocked, keys tucked under a flower pot or hanging on a nail behind the screen door. Kids drifted between backyards, chasing the last bit of daylight, and parents trusted that someone nearby was always half watching. Borrowed tools, a tin of paint, a bag of lemons from a tree down the street, these things moved from house to house without ceremony. The shopkeeper at the corner store might keep an eye out if a child lingered too long, or call home if someone forgot their change. Neighbours were not strangers. They were part of the background, always there. Evening meant slow time, the soft flicker of a porch light, the smell of warm earth, the gentle chorus of frogs and crickets. You could sit for ages without a word, and nobody would think that strange. The world outside grew quieter, but it never felt alone. Days ended slowly, the light slipping away across backyards and verandas. After dinner, the house would settle into a gentle quiet. Sometimes the radio played softly in the corner, voices and music drifting through the rooms while children sprawled on the rug or curled up with a library book. There was no rush to finish anything. The world outside was dim, the last calls of birds fading and the street growing still. In some houses, the only glow came from a lamp or the kitchen window. Then one night something new appeared, a pale, flickering light behind a neighbour's curtains. For a while, it was the only television on the street. People drifted over, slippers on concrete, drawn by curiosity and the promise of something just arrived from far away. Kids squeezed onto the floor. Adults stood at the back. Everyone hushed as the screen came to life. For a few years, that glow pulled the whole street together, just for an hour or two, before the quiet returned and tomorrow promised to be much the same. Streets that once belonged to everyone started to thin out. Cars multiplied, moving faster and louder until the old quiet was gone. New roads cut through neighbourhoods, turning familiar corners into busy crossings. Play drifted indoors, away from the traffic. The corner shops where errands and gossip once passed between neighbours sat empty, their windows clouded as families drove out to bright, distant shopping centres. Even the smallest changes, locked doors and a glance before crossing, crept in without warning. Stories about danger began to travel faster than footsteps. There was no last day. The old rhythm faded, unnoticed at first. Life just shifted, and once it did, it never shifted back. Today, most Australian kids grow up with boundaries their grandparents never imagined, like GPS, locked doors, digital traces. But memory is not just nostalgia. It shapes what we expect from community and trust. What we remember quietly sets the limits of what we are willing to lose next. Share your thoughts below.